Hello again, this is Hiro. What we have here is a box that is roughly 2 feet by about 9 inches. So this is a box, so it's called a hako. So the garden I'm making today is a Hakoniwa. Hako is the box, niwa is a garden in a box. Well, it's basically the same as my bonniwa. But if you study the history of bonsai and related, it goes back, and they have what's called the Hakoniwa. That's my first rock. And this one here, I'm trying to use it so that we have bulk on this side, but it's hollow or on this side here. And then you'll see the reasoning for pretty soon. And then I'll save this for the other side. What I'm attempting to do is to create a very much a Japanese garden. So this may or may not change, but what I wanted to do was to put in what we will find in Japanese gardens. And so this is the most important rock right here, and it kind of reminds you of a waterfall. So maybe what we need to do is turn it slightly. It's always constant changes depending on how everything comes together. I don't know if I told you, but anyway, I was a landscape architect major. Cal Poly Pomona, 1970, very early 1970. I think I started at the end of 60s. But anyway, so that's my background, and my specialty was the Japanese garden. That's why we have this tendency to have landscape scenes rather than individual trees. So my bonsai background came after being a landscape designer. Okay, this is going to be a sort of a trial fit. Can you see that it has to have as much space as possible here? That's why I try to use a rock that has concaveness so that you give a little bit more space in here. That's what I was looking for. And we'll see if this juniper will fit in. Okay, I kind of got it in there. I wish it was a little bit smaller root ball, but you also need a tree that is nicely shaped. That's why, we have all those Niwaki pines. When you're building a Japanese garden, they need to be well shaped before you put it in. And this kind of applies to this too. This will need trimming, fine-tuning, but I think we're off to a pretty good start. Okay, now I did some rough grading, and you can see that it starts to come together. If I could find some matching rocks that are smaller, but I couldn't find any more. So I'm going to work with these 3 for now. And this is at least my approach to a Japanese garden. I put the rocks in, I do the grading, and then the key trees, and then the ornamentation. So this is more of my approach to what a Japanese garden gets done. You notice my friend Dale, he picks out everything, sits it on the table, and then he puts it all together. I think he has a better ability than me. I have to kind of do this and do that, and then I'm finding I'm short, so I had to go get some more stuff. But that's the way I've always done the Japanese garden. So this approach is very typical of what we do in our Japanese garden. I think I also told you that I had learned from Mr. Kawamoto, who developed Psyche. He calls it living landscape. Well, I wanted to take that knowledge and expand it so that it's a Japanese garden in a tray. That's where this idea of Boniwa came from. Well, unfortunately, to do it, you gotta have miniaturized components. So these are the water basins, and I have lanterns. Now, I did find a few things on the market, but they were all uniform. You know, they made it out of the mold. And to me, we need something that's more rustic and in different sizes and shapes. So I started doing raku. That's what these are. Raku is a type of ceramic that we can use. And it took a while to develop, but got better at it. But in order to get better, you have to do many. You gotta keep practicing and practicing. And so I do have hundreds of this and hundreds of that, maybe even thousands of this and thousands of that. And then I kind of got bored, so I put it away. And the other day, Dale finally discovered where I was keeping them. So he's been enthused to start using. Okay, when you study Japanese garden, there's an explanation for everything. But today, I'm just going to show you how it gets done. Typically, this is filled with water, and then you will squat down, wash your hand, and then before you go enter the tea garden. It's all this purification ritual. And okay, how you make the Japanese garden work is to create this sense of mystery. So now you're over here, you squat and purify yourself, and then this path goes on. So somewhere over here is where the tea house is. That's where you're going. You're on your way to the tea house to receive your tea. So that's what a Japanese garden is supposed to represent. And so it is understood that there is steps that comes this way. So what we're trying to do is capture this little vignette of what you'll see in a Japanese garden, and to suggest the rest of it and let your mind do the work. So are you starting to get this idea of what a Japanese garden is? Well, you know, in Japan, land is scarce. So what they have to do is take a small space and make it feel bigger. One of the ways is not to show the whole thing at once. Your imagination will fill it in and think that it is much bigger than it really is. So those are some of the basic concepts that we use in designing the Japanese garden. So, see, in the Japanese garden approach, we try to minimize the amount of stuff we put in. There's kind of a Zen saying that says, how many things can you take away from the garden and still make a statement? In the Western garden, we give them space and we cram it full of plants, and then when there's no more space, then we call it done. Unfortunately, a year later, it gets overgrown and you gotta start chopping them or make those little round or square bushes. Anyway, I'm trying to do this more or less the Japanese style with bare minimum. So I'm gonna go ahead and trim that juniper, and I'm still making changes. I'm still trying to figure out which is the best combination for the lantern and the water basin. Now, can you see why I had to make hundreds of them? Because you can't make one and make it fit everything. So anyway, I'm gonna keep trying. And then one of these days, I was trying to make moss-covered a lantern. The lantern, okay, maybe not so good. The water basin. This one, typically in the Japanese thinking, it should be understated. This one too has color. But hey, let's face it, we're in America here and we tend to be loud and gaudy. And if it's too subtle, a lot of people won't get it anyway. So I'm thinking of going, we add the little spigot. Usually those are fed by the mountain stream, come down, and then it goes through this bamboo and then it hits that water. Now, this is different than the shishi odoshi or the deer or the boar scare. We usually don't use it in this part. This part is quiet, contemplative. So all you get is drip, drip, drip. Okay, I'm done now, I think. Well, the tree needs a little more work. It's a little bit weak up on top. I should be able to get this looking pretty good probably by June. But you could see the process I went through. So this one, I took the approach of a Japanese garden by placing the rock in the mound first and then adding the plant and the lantern, water basin, and then you could see the water spigot. I added this little grass in the back so that it creates more of a mystery. Before, you would see this water spigot too obvious. So I added that, and then our pathway, it swings around behind the rock, so you don't really know where it goes. And just a little bit of grass here to soften that up. So this is the approach that we take when we're doing a Japanese garden versus when we're doing bonsai, we put the tree in first and then we'll complement it with a rock or two. So after you have visited the tea house and you had your tea, when you go back, you'll have this kind of scene. And that's one of the things that we try to do, is to create a different vignette from different point of view. So going one direction, it's one, and then going in the opposite direction, you'll notice different things. But anyway, that's what we tend to do in the Japanese garden, and this Boniwa or Hakoniwa, basically the same thing. The approach was that, approaching like I would do a Japanese garden. So the rocks came first, the mound, the tree, and then they call those things humanizing factors. The lanterns and water basin. I sure hope you enjoy watching me put this Hakoniwa together. I was using the Japanese garden method where we select the rocks, place the rocks, get the mound, and place the tree. And then of course afterwards we put the lanterns and the water basin, spigot, things like that. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed that. See you again real soon in another chapter. The pagoda is supposedly the interment of the Buddha. So in the garden, this represents your gravesite. So typically you want it away from your path. Path represents your lifeline. So you want it off to a distance so that hopefully you'll live long. A lot of times you're so proud of this big pagoda that was very expensive, so you try to stick it in. But once you understand the meaning behind it, you should never use it in a situation like this.